All right, Ed, we're live.
Hello.
Hey, how's the week been?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Living a hermit life. Not bad.
Yeah, we're still in the middle of the COVID-19 restrictions a bit all over the world. I've been, of course, living at home most of the time, but this week I actually took my car to the shop. For the first time, I actually interacted with some other business outside my local supermarket for the past 8 weeks. Felt a bit weird, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, I still imagine the scenes from zombie movies or post apocalypse movies, and they never portray two people separated by distance. They always like they're jammed together. It's
Yeah,
still
a different kind of
so weird.
apocalypse.
Yeah. It
So,
was, I mean, in a sense, kind of that experience.
so Ed, you wrote a lot on chapter 2 this week. How did it go?
Yeah, I think everything is coming together. One thing that I was starting to get disappointed a little bit was the time it was taking me to just write one chapter because we have limited time every week that we give to this chapter. And since I'm not a natural writer, this is a new identity I'm absorbing, and it's fun though. Something that I was not able to do before, and now I'm able to do, and I can see how my art is crafting. So would like to discuss that a little bit in this video, along with how we are looking at the structure of chapter 3, how it came along, and the hook that you've written for the next chapter there. So that's
Yeah.
our probably content for today.
So, when we were talking on just before recording, when we were talking about chapter 2, you raised a topic that I think would be very important for our viewers and listeners, which is that the way you write is completely different from the way I write. And although we are writing the same book, we are actually expressing completely different approaches to the writing process. So last week we talked about the structure I use to write a chapter, right? The story level template, but you write in a completely different way. So what has been your process with chapter 2 so far?
Okay, so I think it's important to just like point out what my opinion is about the differences of the way we write. The first is I see you as a person who's like a little bit structured compared to myself, and the way I perceive the world, the way I experience the world is through emotion. So it's in technical term, it can be said as kinesthetics. So the way I learn things is through experience and primarily through emotion. So every time I try to put a structure to a chapter, I would be compelled to change it or not follow it. It just doesn't connect, like the way I see things doesn't logically connect like straight. You cannot plan ahead and reach that in the exact same way, at least in my case, exact same way that I would plan. So I will have to course correct. So when I wrote, like we spent four weeks writing this chapter, this one chapter, a couple of hours every week, not too much, um, but also because we have started writing for so long, like after a very long time. So I put a lot of ideas that I had at the time when I was sitting and writing, that all were pointing towards the same outcome that we are looking at from this chapter. So I wrote them. I fill up the number of words we set ourselves for, but somehow they were not connecting. So what really helped was I got, like, you can go and watch previous two videos. Vasco gave me live um, suggestions on how I can connect the things, connect the dots. So finally, when I decided, okay, now I've put enough information out there, I have to just switch to editing mode. And this was really weird for me because I actually switched to editing mode. It's not the more creative creation mode anymore. It actually helped me see the logical inconsistencies, and what I have done now
So how
is,
did it feel?
yeah.
The first version of the chapter you wrote through inspiration, and actually one should say that this is not the first version of the chapter. This is already the third or the fourth. But back in the 48-hour workshop, what we did was completely different because we dictated the chapter. So we're writing the next version. So not the first version. We're writing the next version. hopefully the final version for the book with some small changes, but you're taking a different approach. You're writing through inspiration first and collecting lots of ideas. And then you said, then I switched to editing mode. What does that mean for you? Like in practice, how does your brain work when you are in writing versus editing mode?
Um, so when I was in writing mode, there were multiple. It's like Google Map. You go from one place to another, and there are multiple routes, and you just have to select them. Some routes are longer, some routes are shorter, but they both will take you. They all will take you to the same destination in similar time or longer. But when I switch to editing mode, I'm more seeing this one route that okay, this is how I want to take it there, and it's much easier because now I have exhausted my ideas. Now, like if I look at all the previous ideas I've combined in a couple of thousands of words, a lot of them are repeating. And that's a good sign for me because now that I've come up with all the ideas I could come up with and I could satisfy with, I'm not jumping into creative mode. Oh, I can add more new ideas. Now I'm not doing that anymore. I'm copy pasting. I'm even combining seemingly unrelated um, uh, paragraphs that I've written, but then they now connect together. Like, okay, we talk about the biology of the need we have to transfer knowledge, for example, through generations, and we've been doing it through three main mediums throughout civilization: stories that pass on to people, architecture, the buildings we see from ancient time, and like you can study them, and geometry, mathematics, everything else, and the third one is books. So making and then connecting it to the point that books actually hold a very special state in our mind. You've heard of holy books, but you'll never hear of holy blogs, holy tweets, holy everything else. So there's a reason for that, and that makes a very solid point. That why books? Why not blogs? Why not Twitter? You're an author anyway, technically. If you're tweeting, you're an author. If you're writing a blog, you can directly share a Google Doc with people, and if you just want to pass the information, why in the form of book? All of those dots were like the line between the difference of things and similarities was very blurry. Now it's become very clear for me because I'm not jumping into creative mode anymore. I've
All right.
exhausted.
So
Yeah.
I read through the book. I had given you, I mean, through the chapter, I have given you some comments, and I'm eagerly waiting for the next version, so I can work through the story and understand the kind of the narrative that you're building. Chapter 2 is actually a key chapter for us and for Jennifer, right? This is where we talk about reputation as an asset that we build as authors, and the kind of tools and approaches we have that actually help us develop reputation uh, deliberately, which is one of the tools that we are going to be bringing in and giving Jennifer. Ed, I wanted also to talk about chapter 3. So you read through chapter 3 and you gave some feedback. So let's work through that feedback. And then also the cliffhanger, which I just added you and you just reviewed before we started recording. So when you were going through chapter 3, which we talked about the outline last time, how did you feel? How did that chapter feel to you as you were reading that?
So it's again something to do with the review process because we are jumping between chapters. Sometimes what happens is in my mind is that one outcome is mixed with another. So for me, I have to create a distinction. So what I did was I read the chapter 3 ending first, and then I was almost kind of lost, like, oh, I forgot what we were trying to achieve with this chapter. So I went on to the sheet that we showed last week, which is the whole
The
customer
story map.
like the reader story map, exactly. So the whole story map to see like where we standing right now, and that was understand that the process of self-publishing is something that I can do on my own um, if I want to. So that was chapter 2, and then what I did was I came back to the ending of the chapter 2, and then just had a quick skim through it, and then it made all like perfect sense, and I could connect
So
that
you mean
okay, this is
chapter
where we are
3?
entering. Sorry.
You meant chapter 3. you
Chapter
came back
3.
to
So,
chapter
yeah,
3.
you're right. Chapter 3. The ending of chapter 3, which is a chapter you are writing. So, because that is the point of entry into section 2, that's where we are teaching people that you are actually an author, um, but you just don't know it yet. And guiding through the process. This is probably the heaviest section in the book, guiding through the process of authoring the book 48-hour method way. um, it's something that I haven't come across online or anywhere else. It's something that we have developed uh, while working together and experimenting a lot, and now we are sharing with everyone. So that's kind of the cliffhanger is building that kind of excitement and curiosity for people to just dive in.
Yeah. So, by the way, this is a great example of how to collect feedback. So, as I was hearing you giving feedback on chapter 3, you said, as I started reading the chapter, I wasn't really sure what we were trying to achieve. And that is great feedback because I know that the beginning of the chapter needs to change. Because when Jennifer reads through the book, she shouldn't have that question. The first few words of the chapter should make it clear for her
Right.
why chapter 3 is there. So there's two possibilities. Either we change the focus of chapter 3, so the objection, the top objection, which is what gives it the main title on the story map, or we change the introduction. But that
Yeah.
definitely needs to be done.
Yeah. I think that could easily be done with just beginning with what we have learned so far. Just one small paragraph of like,
So
this is
that
where we
I
are, and this is
Yeah,
where we are.
so that's a great point. Okay, so here's my preference as a writer. I don't want to give context. I find that the movies that I watch that spend, one third contextualizing the story are extremely boring. I get lost. I don't want to read. Sorry, I don't want to watch those movies. Right. Same with books. I remember in school, as I was reading some of the books we had to read for school, the books that I had the most struggle with, the books that were the least interesting, were those that spent a lot of time elaborating on the context. You
Yeah.
know, what was the house like? How did the air smell like? And there was no action, there was no story developing. So, one thing that I learned in my own editing for my own way of writing is nothing that is in the book can be superfluous. In other words, every single word, every comma needs to develop the story further. And of
Yeah.
course, we're talking about Jennifer's story because we're writing Jennifer's story so that she can then read the book and feel that the book is for her. So I need to find a way that to introduce the goal of the chapter without spending any time contextualizing, writing about the context, i.e., this is what we've studied so far, here's what we are going to study next. Like that's not how I think Jennifer wants to read the book, and I don't think that's the book that Jennifer wants to write either, because that's uh, many of those books as I read them, because a lot of nonfiction books are for my work, so I read a lot of those. Many of those books feel more like somebody's training program got translated into a book. And writing a book is not the same as organizing a class. It's not the same. We don't have the same people in front of us. They don't have the same goal. It's a completely different process, right?
Yeah.
So I need to figure out the way to introduce chapter 3 and chapter three's goal without spending time contextualizing. So there's one thing I have in mind, a technique I have in mind. I'm going to interview an author of ours at Oikos Office series that has done the 48-hour workshop himself and has started writing the book with us. Uh, and I'll try to get his perspective and then try to start the book with that scene, right? So for me, I'm a big fan of action scenes, and I feel when I'm reading a book, sorry, I feel that the books that drive me in are the ones that the books that pull me in are the ones where we start with an action that makes me feel like, okay, this is a book for me, right? So I want to make sure that we start the book giving the reader a clear understanding of what's in it for them, but also with an action scene, right? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. I have a question here. Um, just a thought experiment. Uh, what was the last book you remember you finished reading?
Anti-Fragile by Nicholas Nassim Taleb.
Taleb. So, how long it took you to finish that book?
Probably read it in 2 days.
And did you read them in one go, or like
Yeah,
two
big
days spread
chunks.
across 2 months, 6 months?
No, big chunks, like
Big
really
chunks.
calendar days, like two
Okay,
calendar days.
cool. So, I wanted to point out the bias. I like your approach, but I would like to challenge that, and with your own bias, because you're seeing the world the way you consume information, and this is how you consume information. One big story, the whole book, right? This is an assumption that if a reader read the whole book in one big chunk, then the context that you're mentioning is really boring. I agree with you, no question. I agree. But the type of book that we are authoring is something that people need to visit again and again from time and different times. They won't implement everything in one go. They will implement across weeks or spread across, like even if they will allocate 48 hours to do it, that will be spread across at least a couple of days. So in order, just the effect that I had, that in the beginning of chapter, maybe you can start with an action scene, but just immediately after action scene, tell we can put up a paragraph saying like, and paragraph could be just 2 sentences and saying that like, okay, so far we have learned that you how a book help you build your reputation. Now let's show you that you can actually self-publish your own book, and you don't have to follow any of the difficult methodologies that everyone else talk about, because this is the easiest, simplest methodology we can ever think of. And that's a claim, and that's an exciting thing. And then jump into the remaining of the chapter. So
Yeah, I
this is
think
just,
that's a better. I think that's a better approach for sure.
yeah.
And I can. So uh, two things that you said that are important. We expect Jennifer to come back and read individual chapters over time. So that's an important constraint that we're giving ourselves, because that, of course, means that we have to take that into account when we write the chapters. Then the second thing is that we can put the contextualizing as a benefit to the story rather than just a formula filling technique. Do you see what I mean? Because one way to look at a chapter is to look at is, we just use this formula, right, or template, right, and the first two paragraphs are talking about what we've learned so far, and the first paragraph is what we've learned so far, second paragraph is what you're going to learn in this chapter, then you teach it, and then the last paragraph is to reinforce what you learned in this chapter with a cliffhanger for the next chapter. Like, if I look at that as a formula, I can't do it. I would not want to read that. But as you described it now, it makes sense to me from a storytelling perspective, which is to pick something from chapter 2 that was not explicitly told in chapter 2 and put it in a new light that helps understand chapter 3 and why chapter 3 is there. So if I do that, I can see that as storytelling.
I love the innovation. Yeah. I mean, it's doing the same thing. And basically what I'm standing here for is the user experience. I mean, it can be taken in a formulaic way, but it can also be taken in this innovative way. It does the same job. It tells them that like, hey, if you're not on the same page, maybe it's worth going back and reading the previous chapter before this one. So I like it. I like this approach, and it's user experience. It's a classic user experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I especially like the thought of uh, uh, using the context as story building, because it actually builds anticipation,
Yeah,
right? So if you look at it as storytelling, uh, the hero just went through a challenge that she has overcome. That's chapter 2, right? Challenge is self-doubt, not understanding what reputation is, and not understanding the role of a book in building reputation, right? That's the challenge, and then that's what chapter 2 resolves. And now I can bring that into chapter 3 as um, a celebration, right? It's almost like we're celebrating that we've overcome a challenge, and now we are ready to take on the next challenge, which we would not have been ready to take on had we not read chapter 2. So
Right.
like if I think about it that way, then it builds story and it actually builds anticipation, because it builds the okay, so what is this going to be now? Right? How does this build on reputation? So that I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So that's cool. That's cool. So how far? So what's coming next?
So for me, the important part in chapter 3 is that it helps us introduce and formalize what will become our method. So I've started writing it here, and I'm starting to outline first what are all of the steps, because we need to explain that to Jennifer, so we need to outline those. And also, what are the tools which will be the bonus material? What are the tools we used, and how you can use those tools to achieve the same goals? And then another very important aspect, which is the concepts that we develop in this method, because concepts are kind of a language, right? And hopefully, this will become a very nice infographic to distribute to our readers and listeners, so that they have a quick reference sheet whenever they start implementing the method. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that the language we describe in the book is very important for authors. So if you're writing a book, of course, the first thing you think about is, what is the book going to be about? So in chapter 3, we explain what the book is about, why we are writing it, and what's the benefit we hope to provide to Jennifer. But then once that is clear, the next question is, okay, even if I know the focus of the book, the who and why we are writing the book, I still don't know what to write about. And in fact, that's one of the chapters we have in the book, which is finding out what you should be writing about. As we claim in chapter 3, the whole book is about getting a method up and running that writes the book for you, that makes it so easy that you are driven along by your own wishes and goals and objectives. You're driven along through the process as if you were being guided until the book is out and written, right? So it's kind of a book. We call it a book writing method that writes the book for you, if you can keep the method going. And that's what we are talking about in the whole of the book. So in chapter 3, I talk about what the focus is, what are topics, and topics is a key word. Roughly, a topic maps to a chapter. So there are certain topics we want to talk about. And then we talk about which I think is the most powerful insight from this method, which is, and you for sure know a lot about this, Ed, because this is right up the marketing and sales alley, which is objections are the core driver of the urge to write. And we design the method so that we uncover objections, which then gives us the topics we write about. That's the bigger objections. In fact, they give us the parts, so the big chunks of the book. We remember we have 3, right? And those are the main objections that Jennifer has, and those are the 3 parts of the book. And then we have the topics, which are smaller objections, the chapters, and then the objections themselves become sections or even paragraphs or phrases in the book. So objections kind of become the dynamo that builds momentum into this book writing process. And uh, maybe you can talk a little bit about what an objection is and how important it is, for example, for copywriting and sales.
Yeah, I mean, there are many ways to look at it, but I would start with the extreme cases. So anything that you would be scared to talk about, or things that they ask that you would, or they're scared of. So things like in in chapter 2, because I've recently written it and it's fresh memory in my head. There's a point where we're talking about, and we talked in length about this in previous video as well, that if you have not written a book and you call yourself an author, isn't this a fraud? That's an objection. Most writers will avoid writing about it, and I'm making my point there that no, it's not. And I'm making logical reasons, I'm making practical reasons, I'm giving examples of this as how it's always been. and why this thinking is flawed, and the psychological difference between person who's actually a fraud would be more thinking like, when I will be found out, how am I going to escape, rather than how can I not be like, the people who are not fraud, they will think like, oh, what if we are found, we are called frauds. It's a completely different way of, a completely different worldview. So making those like reasoning and giving example from things like Kickstarter, for example, where every project is announced before they even know whether they can pull it off or not, but they give an assumed plan that we will pull it off like this. But most projects which are overfunded, if you look at Kickstarter, were never delivered on time. Some of them even got rejected, like not rejected, sorry, cancelled. It's just that in human knowledge, they couldn't predict the challenges they're going to face in developing that. Now imagine if they would have developed that thingy before launching the campaign or before getting funded, they would just waste a lot of money. I mean, this is something that has always been there. Another example is insurance. We've been insuring like for ages, and what we are insuring for, we are crowdfunding our own death, if you talk about insurance. So an event that will happen sometime in the future, if it could happen, then you get rewarded. If it doesn't happen, then you get rewarded with a life. So it's like that.
So one objection we tackle in chapter 3, which I think is a great example of what objections are there for, is that Jennifer is constantly saying, I don't have time to write a book. Right. So chapter 3 is all about that. It's all about tackling Jennifer's anxiety over not having time to actually write a book. And we outline the method and explain how the method will help you get first the motivation and also a compact approach to going from a fuzzy idea to having a book outline and the first chapters written out in 48 hours. That's why the book is called the 48-hour book method. And the title of the book is itself a way to tackle that objection. In fact, that becomes the most important objection. We go back to it over and over again. That's what the method is there for. That's why parts of the method are there for. But this is just an example of how one objection, I don't have time to write the book that I want to write anyway, because I know it has all kinds of positive impacts in my career and gets me invited to speak at conferences. That objection becomes the dynamo that drives, why don't you have time? And if we're going to write this faster than what, traditionally would happen, then what would that look like? And every time we come up with a suggestion, Jennifer has an objection.
Yeah.
Right? When we say 48 hours, people will say, well, Jennifer will say, well, you can't write the whole book in 48 hours. I can't be an author until the whole book is written. And we tackled that objection too. Yeah. That actually, in fact, you can be an author even before the book is written, just like you said about the Kickstarter projects, right? The crowdfunding projects. And then Jennifer will say, well, but I don't even know what to write about. And then we tackled that objection by talking about the SMIQ method and the analysis that we do on that and the empathy map and what the topic is. And then we drive back into objections. So objections are kind of a dynamo. They motivate you, but they also give you very clear guidance what's next. And that's a very important aspect of this book writing method, because as I write in chapter 3, we are writing for others to help them become what they want to be. And if we do that, their objections are our fuel for writing. And for me, the most important aspect is that brings both motivation and clarity to the author. For me, that's the most important aspect of using objections. And of course, it's a critical sales tool. We will come to objections all the time, especially when we talk about sales and promotion and marketing. So objections are, a basic asset we have, right? So what I would say is that for most people, an objection is like, oh man, they really don't want to listen to me. And for us, it's like, awesome, you got an objection. That's great content you can produce.
Yeah. And not everything you need to know before. You can go and find solutions if you don't know anything. Um, Vasco, do you have story map open on your screen? Maybe we can just, I would like to make a point there.
I will start sharing it. Just a second. There we go.
So cool. So if you look at the screen, let's go in the beginning. Yeah. So all the red blocks are the sections of the book,
The
and
parts
the
of the book.
sorry, yeah, parts of the
The
books,
parts.
parts of the book, and all three of these are three big objections. What we have included. So, for example, part one is if you say I'm not an expert, okay, we cover that. Part two is you say, I'm not an author. I don't know how to write a book. That's an objection. We cover that. And the third one is nobody would listen to me. I mean, how would I get, I don't know marketing. I don't know anything. I don't know how to get my book out to people. I don't have time to do that. 48-hour method on and these goes together. Now, if you look at the chapter names as well, they're not something we invented. It's like all of them or most of them are actually objections. For example, the first one, has anyone ever done that before? Second one, how do I build a reputation as an expert? Like, am I an expert? Like, because the first section is all about expertise. I'm not an expert. And then the solution is this chapter, which is book will help you get recognized as an expert. And can I do a book? It's tedious process. It's a mammoth task. Chapter 3. So
Yeah.
if you
In
look at
fact,
all the chapters,
I'm rephrasing this. This is great that we're going through this because these are user objections,
yeah, it makes much more
and then
easier
these
to understand that way.
are user objections with solutions, and these are we can call it topic. We call it topics, by the way, and which lead to chapters, and then these are the actual objections we talk about because they are so many, right? These
Yeah.
are the whole list of objections that we
And
have.
how you got these is what we are teaching in this book. I mean, we did SMIQ survey. We showed it even in some of the previous videos, and people will tell you all of these objections. All you have to do is arrange, reorganize, and see which ones are big, which ones are small, and uh, structure your whole book like that.
Yeah, we are adapting the story map for this. I think that we will come up with a much better version of the story map for book writing as we, fine tune the method and so on. But I think for now the most important thing is that book parts are the top objections, typically 3 to 5. User goals are the user goals, so
Yeah.
we didn't change that part so far. Then we have objections, which lead to topics, and they become the chapters. And then we have more objections. These are the fine-grained objections that for which we have detailed solutions, and those are either a paragraph, a phrase, or a section in a chapter. It doesn't matter, but they are much more concrete. This one's here. Cool. I think that was a very useful conversation. It also helps me to kind of start formalizing the method because we do want to publish the infographic at some point with step-by-step instructions that the readers and listeners can go back to once they've read the book. They can go to and use that as kind of their cheat sheet. We will have examples of how to run experiments, what an objection looks like, what to do in discovery, because discovery, it turns out, is a very important part of this process, which is what we do just before the 48-hour workshop. And it really helps, at least as I went through it, it really helped me structure how to convey the message, which is all about chapter 3. So chapter 3 just outlines the rest of the book, gives you, if you want certain things, here's the chapter you want to go to, explains why that is important. So I think that was a very useful part. And if I was writing the book, which turns out I am, I think that infographic would be extremely useful.
Yeah, yeah, and it could go in either as a lead generation tool or a bonus for the book as well.
Indeed. Awesome, Ed. I think there was another great video. I mean, just so many of these videos could become parts, or at least parts of the videos could become modules in an e-course of how to write the book. I'm really developing the idea, like maybe we do have to put out an e-course with the book too.
Yeah, yeah. We have the structure. The book is there. Somebody might need greater hand holding than just reading and doing it themselves. Maybe somebody need demonstration. So this goes there.
Awesome, Ed. Well, see you next week.
Cool. Thank you for your time.